All right, as mentioned before, my name is Mark Norton. I'm the Hunting Access and Farm Bill Coordinator with Game Fish and Parks here in Pierre. And I'll give you an update on where we're at with the Farm Bill and how it relates to South Dakota and conservation and some other habitat challenges that we're facing right now in the landscape. So just start out with an update on the Farm Bill. It had expired last September 30th, but was extended over the new year through this September 30th. With that, it reauthorized many of the conservation programs that are important to the habitat of South Dakota, like CRP, WRP, and Grassland Reserve Program, as well as EQIP and WIP. Like I said before, they had been all essentially non-functioning upon the expiration of the last Farm Bill. So all last fall, there was nothing going on with any of those conservation programs. So some other hurdles with this Farm Bill extension. Even though everything has been reauthorized, there's a lot of acres that are authorized to be enrolled but don't have any funding to enroll them. So there are over about 186,000 acres of continuous CRP, and that's CRP that can be enrolled with a start date of the first of every month of the year, versus a general sign-up only allows start dates October 1st of that year. So these are practices broken down like wetland restoration, the duck nesting habitat initiative, farm wetlands program, our pheasant safe, which actually we got new allocations of both pheasant safe and the western grassland wildlife safe last year sometime before the Farm Bill expired, but they didn't allow any acres to be enrolled just due to the pending end of the Farm Bill. So all those are still out there available, but no landowners are able to enroll their land in them right now. There's also 25,000 acres left of our CREP program that cannot be enrolled right now either. And there's also quite a few other unlimited CRP practices that don't have acre allocations. They're just always available for landowners to enroll their land into, and those things include things like shelter belts, grass waterways, and buffers. And a newer one is pollinator habitat, which is essentially like a perennial food plot of forbs and flowers. A couple other programs, Wetlands Reserve Program and the Grassland Reserve Program. They have no funding yet to enroll new lands into the program under the Farm Bill extension. South Dakota has, however, received $7 million for the Wetlands Reserve Program to complete wetland and grassland restorations on existing easements that have been enrolled in past years, and also to close any easements that have been accepted in the past but have not closed yet. So why authorization but no action? Well, you've probably all been aware of the different federal budget issues facing the country in the past year or two. A couple of them, the fiscal cliff, recently the sequestration that just kicked in March 1st, and another one coming up here. Currently the federal government is funded by a continuing resolution that funds them through March 27th. Beyond that, there isn't any budget for the federal government to keep operating. I did read today that the Congress has passed a budget stopgap, they call it, to fund the government through the end of this fiscal year, and that will have to go through the Senate and the regular role of legislative action before it becomes law. So essentially, there's been too many moving targets for USDA to get an apportionment from the Office of Management and Budget to actually say, yep, we got this much money, go ahead, start enrolling lands, spending money, putting money under contract. And another thing I've been told, for all those continuous acres, they're going through software updates and they are not available currently. So that's another reason they haven't allowed any of the continuous practices to start enrolling either. However, they have recently announced that there will be a general CRP sign-up May 20th to June 14th. That was announced by Secretary of Ag Vilsack back at Pheasant Fest the middle of February. This is a great opportunity to enroll and re-enroll expiring acres of CRP. As you can see, in the last 3 years, through general sign-ups, South Dakota has been able to enroll over 200,000 acres into CRP. CRP rental rates are also currently being revised, and in most cases this will mean a CRP rental rate increase in most counties of the state, as cash rent for cropland has increased since 2010, the last time those CRP rental rates were set. On a national scale, there's a national program cap for CRP of 32 million acres. Currently, there's 27 million acres enrolled across the U.S. 3.3 million acres are set to expire at the end of this federal fiscal year, September 30th. New Farm Bill drafts have dropped that national cap to 25 million. So it's very likely that going forward nationally there will be less CRP acres authorized for landowners to enroll, and each state, including South Dakota, will probably get a smaller piece of that pie. So in South Dakota, where are we at? We got just under 1 million acres right now. Nothing's been changed since October 1st, as there's been no action enrollments. And that also includes 75,000 acres of our CREP program. So without CREP, we would be just above 900,000 acres of CRP in South Dakota. And we have about 105,000 acres set to expire in South Dakota this fall. So it looks kind of gloomy, and this chart shows the past, where we've been. Our most recent peak was in 2007. We were just under 1.6 million acres, and you can see now we're sitting right here, just under 1 million acres. So we've lost a third of the CRP in South Dakota in the last 5 years about, and we are on schedule to go downhill as we lose more acres. However, I got a feeling we're gonna stick around 1 million acres for the next couple of years once we get authorization back to start enrolling some of those acres, and the general CRP with increased CRP rental rates. I'm hoping we can stay around 1 million acres. Some other recent, studies on land use change in South Dakota. This one was done by a couple of guys from South Dakota State University and the Geographical Information Center of Excellence. It recently came out maybe 2 weeks ago, documenting the change of grasslands in the western corn belt of the U.S., and South Dakota was included in a portion of that western corn belt. They found that between 2006 and 2011, let's see if I hit the right button here, about a net change of 1.3 million acres in that western corn belt. They used to be grassland, are now either corn or soybeans. And if you look, so they found there's a gross change of almost 2 million acres, but there were some acres of corn and soy that went to grassland as well. And I'll get into South Dakota a little more detail in the next slide. Just in South Dakota, that change was about 451,000 acres. And you can see on this map they've got a percentage conversion rate of grass to corn and soybean. And you can see the hotter spots are where larger percentage of the grasslands have changed to corn and soybean. So on these conversion acres, they also did a few other analysis, and of them in South Dakota, most of them were on lands that were subject to erosion, and also another large portion of them was subject to a climate limitation on the landscape, essentially meaning it was more susceptible to drought. They also took a look at where those grassland conversion acres were relative to locations with wetlands on the landscape in South Dakota and across their whole study area. And they found that in both the Dakotas, 70% of those grasslands were within 250 meters of wetlands. And one of their overlays here, all the red areas are where those grassland acres that were converted were within that 250 meter buffer of a wetland based on the National Wetlands Inventory. And you can see the distance here. There is almost 40% that were within 100 meters of wetlands in South Dakota as well. So they took a look at this in comparison to the change in CRP. As I showed you, we lost some CRP acres in that similar 5-year time frame. And they found that in South Dakota, you can see the red areas. Those are areas where the grassland to corn and soybean conversion was greater than the amount of CRP that was no longer under contract or on the landscape. So a summary of the study found that grassland conversions have not been occurred at this fast of a rate at any other time in the U.S. history since the 1920s and 1930s. Corn and soybean production expanded onto lands that were subject to erosion and drought vulnerability. And those conversions were concentrated in close proximity to wetlands. And grassland conversions cause a concern with respect to not only waterfowl, but pheasants, grassland nesting birds, shorebirds, and other neotropical migrants. Other habitat challenges that South Dakota is facing right now, wetland conversion. There's been a widespread implementation and use of pattern tile. Farmers dropping out of the federal farm program and enabling them to drain wetlands without any financial penalties. Another recent study actually just came out, I think last week, done by some researchers at the University of Minnesota, documented that ag drainage, primarily from subsurface tile drainage, has increased the erosive characteristics of rivers and streams in 21 different watersheds they took at in pretty much the heart of farm country Minnesota. And that made increase their flow by greater than 50% since 1940. And they primarily contributed that to the loss of wetlands on the landscape. These increased flows have widened the rivers, as shown in these two pictures here, by 10 to 40%. So most of that erosion is stream bank erosion. And these added sources of sedimentations have reduced water quality in rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. We're also witnessing destruction of Shelterbelt and farmsteads being converted to crop ground, which these can serve as important wildlife habitat, winter cover. So what can be done about these habitat and landscape changes? Well, one of the most simple things we can do is support conservation funding in the federal farm bill. As I showed you, there is a proposal to cut the national cap of CRP to 25 million, where it's 32 million now. And all the other budget cuts are also impacting all the conservation programs of the farm bill. Another national movement is for tying conservation compliance to the eligibility for the subsidy of federal crop insurance premiums. And this has been publicly supported by the National Farmers Union, the National Sustainable Ag Coalition. Numerous past NRCS chiefs have come out in papers, and actually a recent Deputy Secretary of Agriculture put out a publication supporting this and educating everybody about what conservation compliance is and what it would do to tie it to the federally subsidized crop insurance premiums. And the South Dakota corn growers recently stated that they are neutral on the subject, as they have found that it's difficult for them to defend producers that are dropping out of the farm program to drain wetlands. And another movement is sod saver, which has been pushed by our South Dakota legislators and Senators Thune and Congresswoman Noem, which would do a similar thing to conservation compliance and remove the eligibility for that federally subsidized portion of crop insurance for anybody who converts native sod to agricultural crop ground. With that, I'll take any questions or comments.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Any other good news?
Yeah, really.
How long was it extended to farm?
Just through this September 30th.
Go ahead.
Mark, in the Access Committee, we talked about the kind of the domino effect of having the reduced amount of set-asides and what relationship that might have on our walk-in program and our access program. You want to just quickly
Sure.
Talk to the commission about what that situation will be?
Yeah. It goes into, I mean, you can apply it to all the habitat changes in the landscape. Essentially, we lease as much of the best habitat quality that we can in our walk-in program, and we're still leasing a small piece of the pie. And so essentially a bigger piece, that pie is getting smaller, of lands in conservation, lands, huntable type lands. And so it is we're likely going to see a smaller portion of the walk-in area program have better habitat in it because of less opportunity on the landscape.
Mark, what do we have right now in the walking area program that's probably CRP land? Do we know roughly?
Roughly 150,000 acres
With or without crop?
without crop.
Has anybody looked at, or maybe can you even look at, you have these reduced number of acres, results in reduced number of pheasants, results in reduced number of licenses sold, results in economic impact of X.
Those are all concerns, and actually there's a new study going to be done in the next couple of years, I think, looking at the hunting economics of CRP in North and South Dakota. So that's coming along. But yeah, the department is definitely thinking about that and concerned about it.
The study that Mark mentioned is actually going to be conducted by FSA at the federal level, is that the one you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
FSA within USDA is looking at the economic importance and impacts of conservation land, and so they're actually going to do an evaluation of looking what those impacts would be with fewer acres and what that trickle effect is. And they've actually focused particularly on the Dakotas, so it'll be interesting. That'll be good for us to have that information as well.
But it's 2 years out.
It's 2 years out,
Right.
and a lot could change in 2 years.
Yeah.
Right. Because to me, it's important. I mean, it's obviously important, really important, and because the economic impact of what you just presented, which was really well presented, is significant, to say the least.
One of our biggest challenges when you talk about, for example, the CRP program, from the resources it needs to implement a program like that on the ground, even just in South Dakota, is probably larger than just about the whole Division of Wildlife budget. And so we often get asked the question, well, why don't you guys just do your own CRP program? Well, it's not quite that easy just from what it takes to put a program like that on the ground to make it incentively high enough for those landowners to be interested and involved. That's where the CREP has been so great, because we were able to leverage state dollars with federal dollars to put that on the ground. But even that is it's a substantial investment in the future, obviously, but those are the kind of programs we need to have those big impacts on the landscape.
Yeah, just to put some dollars to what Tom was talking about, the annual federal expenditure of CRP in South Dakota is between $60 and $70 million. And we've got 75,000 acres of CREP right now, and our share of it is a little over $2 million. So you got 1 million acres versus 75,000 acres costing us $2 million, and we're only paying a small share of that total cost of those CREP acres as well. So it is very expensive, and you know, the take-home message on a lot of these things is a lot of it is federal programs or federal policy that are not easily controlled by us here in South Dakota. So as much influence as you guys can put on the congressmen and senators to help out South Dakota would be the best we can do.
Is there a way to put your presentation on the website or other ways for us to get that word out and help everybody understand what you just presented?
I think back to one of our guest speakers or attendees here today, Mr. Taunton spoke during the open mic in his last statement of need people to participate. And that probably is the strongest message relating to this right now. The congressional folks always hear from the NGOs and the state wildlife agencies and those that on a day-to-day basis of these programs and the implications of all that stuff. But if we need the individual citizens, the sportsmen, the landowners, the whole array of those folks to send that message. I think what he said in his words to you today, probably the best take-home message that we can get to people out there is that everybody needs to participate and talk to our congressional people.
Did the sequester, that was 2.5%, wasn't it, on the whole?
I'm not exactly sure what I've read different rates of what sequester actually was. For CRP, it actually did not cut any of the funding for the program to lease any acres or anything, but it did cut, FSA's budget, and so they've got essentially less money to fund the staff to do the job, to do the work, and that may be one of the reasons that they're still holding on to all that stuff and not letting people put it into their programs yet too.
I think there's a little bit of PR that if we could work on a little bit. Sometimes it's them and us, and farmers are trying hard to make a living. Plus, we want to have good pheasants. We love to have pheasant hunting out at our place. But we also have to make our non-hunting land more usable so that we can not only make a living, but pay for our land. So if we could somehow, sometimes you read these articles and it's always the farmer is the bad guy, and they really aren't.
Right.
And this is awesome information, and it is a fact of what's coming up. But if we could somehow let us farmers know that if we try to do it properly, we can also have habitat, and heaven forbid we might tile something too.
Right.
But we still want to have our habitat for the farmers. So there's got to be a happy medium, because you read an article and boy, a farmer gets turned off in a hurry that he's the bad guy.
Right. Right, and I hope I didn't paint the farmer as the bad guy.
No,
here.
you
Okay.
absolutely did not. This was I'm just talking about some of the different articles that have been quite in the paper quite a bit lately, because that's all your things are a fact.
Right.
But we've got to come to some kind of a good working relationship. And I think Game Fish and Parks is trying to with CREP and all that. I commend them for that, but I also have to speak on behalf of the farmer landowner.
Well, thank you, and Bob's got a announcement, Bob Barton, and then I think we're gonna take a break till tomorrow morning.
Thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bob Barton. On behalf of the South